Real quick, I got to say, I wasn't planning on being here this week because I was going to take the easy way out since my wife wasn't here. So I already thought on Monday, I was like, there's no way I'm going to church. I'm going to hang out and maybe accidentally turn the TV on and not go to church. but then she sent me an email, and I think this is a good thing for me to be here because the last couple of days have been a little rough, and I think God had something to say, and I'm already feeling blessed by it, and you guys are blessed as well. Amen. This is read from the nearly inspired version. NIV. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvest, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is a Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave the orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stock for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative, and he is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they have finished harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go to the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat fields were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Thank you, Daniel. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been knocked off your feet any particular season when you just had a season of life where everything just seemed to come together and work well? You ever have one of those seasons where it didn't matter, you could have done whatever and things just seem to just work out well. And have you ever walked in that moment when all of a sudden you're treated in a way that you just go, wow, I just never deserved that kind of treatment. I'm being treated so well. That's what we call a season of favor. Some of us in this room have never walked in that kind of season. There are some of us in this room that maybe we've never experienced that kind of moments, those kind of seasons when everything seems to come together. And some of us have. But have you ever been in that moment when nothing worked? When everything you did just seems like people are against you, situations are against you, nothing is adding up. Have you ever been in a season of loss, where you lost something you expected to lose, and then you lost something you didn't expect to lose, and then you lost something you couldn't afford to lose? Have you ever had that kind of a season? I have. And when you're going through a season in which grief begins to take its toll on us, because it's long, and we go, it's wave after wave, and we go, man, where is this coming from? I can't seem to get my head above the waters. You see, sometimes in this life, we forget that it's broken. And because of its brokenness, there are just moments that life has grief. Now, before we go any further, I want to go back to chapter 1 and remind us, because this book and this chapter is filled with so many rich things of what does it mean to walk in favor. What does it mean? Can we be a person that even garnishes favor? Is there something that you can do that can posture yourself into favor? What happens for some of us when we're in a season that it just seems like there's so much grief that I need favor? I need favor because one expectation after another seems to get dashed. It seems like no matter what I put together, it just doesn't seem to come together. And in chapter 1, if you remember the words of Ruth, she says, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you, for where you go I will go, and where you lodge I will lodge, and your people shall be my people, and your God my God." That is not just poetry of beautiful words, but it is a conviction that she is saying, listen, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the challenges, regardless of whatever's thrown my way, I want you to know where you go, I will go. And last week we talked about this because if you don't get this, you can't understand chapter 2. This is not just about words that we speak in a marriage ceremony. This is about words in which people are in relationship with one another. They're committed in community, and they're saying, where you go, I'm going. We're going the same direction. We're going to fly the same direction. And here's what I want you to know. This whole book, if not this chapter, says this: humility commits, pride runs. You don't get anything else from this message. We're going to see humility exercised in this chapter in such a degree that we're going to see humility that says, listen, whatever it takes, I'm going to surrender. And I'm going to allow God the privileged opportunity to do whatever He's going to do. But there's a pride that says, man, there's some things I just won't do. I just won't do that, God. God, I'm just not going to trust you in that. See, many of us, we've had that moments where we just have the mindset, it's just the same old, same old. You wake up the next morning and you go, well, nothing's changed. It's just the same old thing. And then there's that one moment, and it happens sometimes. Some unseen force has transitioned the season, and before you get the evidence, you just begin to feel it in your soul. And you go, wow, something's happened. You walk outside, the sun is shining in a different way. You can feel the vitamin D just forming in your skin. You go to school, and for some of us, you know, that person that we never expected smiles at us. Or your boss calls you in and says, come here. And you think, what do you got to say? Hey, listen, you're doing a great job. And they say something kind like that. And you go, what's happening? What's happening? Why all of a sudden things are changing? Your doctor calls up and he says, we got your blood test back, and you have the heart of an 18-year-old. Wow. Your mother calls up that evening just to say, I'm so proud of you, son. I'm so proud of everything that you're doing. That's favor. See, favor is something that God gives. Now, but here's the mindset. Here are the questions. When we get these kinds of situations that happen in our lives, here's where we tend to go. Is this just random or something by chance? Maybe it's just luck. Is it just something that we're a victim to? Maybe some people are just meant for favor and some people are just absolutely miserable. I remember one time I went into a rapid care clinic. I want to be careful because we live in a small community, but I looked at the nurse that took me in and I said, "How are you doing today?" And the nurse looks at me and says, "Sir, my job sucks." And I go, "Good. I see from your chart," she says, "you're in for a pneumonia shot." She says, "I guess I'll be the one giving you the shot." I said, "Please, no, not you." I don't need someone with that kind of mindset that all of a sudden needs to give me the shot because you're already in a mindset that your life is miserable. So here's the real biblical, here's the theological question we need to ask. Is there a way to attract favor? Can you use favor? And can you learn how to cultivate it and walk in favor? In today's passage, Ruth's story begins with her walking in winter. We're in the 2nd chapter of the book of Ruth, and if you remember from last week, we basically talked about the grief and all the challenges. And then we have Naomi and her, say this word 3 times, Elimelech. If you can say Elimelech 3 times, you're probably charismatic. Anyways, Naomi and her husband have a famine. There's a famine in Bethlehem, so they get out of there and they go to the foreign power of Moab. And in Moab, let's check this out. You can't even plan this. Her husband dies. Then her 2 sons die. And Naomi is left with 2 widowed daughter-in-laws, and they decide to leave her. One stays back halfway through the journey. And then they trek 30 miles from Moab to Bethlehem, and they cross 2 rivers in a mountain range in grief and in the middle of winter. And the Bible says that when they came to Bethlehem, Naomi's hometown, and she gets back and all Jerry Springer breaks out. It just breaks out. She walks into the town and the people are like, "Is that Naomi? Is that Naomi? Naomi's back." Boy, man, Naomi, she's lost so much weight. She doesn't look healthy to me. She left with servants and silks and sons and a husband. Now she comes back skinny and poor. Her husband died. Her children died. Who is that Moabite girl? We don't know who took them in because we're not given a clear indicator of that. But when you were listening carefully, when Daniel Cervantes read the chapter to you, you realized that when they got into Bethlehem, someone let them stay in their home. We don't know who it is. All we know is that someone made provision for them and exercised Old Testament hospitality with them. In other words, someone showed them a tiny bit of favor. Now, they probably stayed in a barn, but wherever they stayed, I want you to think about this. Naomi and Ruth come back to Bethlehem. They come back to the house of bread, and then they lie down in a manger. The unseen hand of God is about to change the season of favor. But they don't sleep. They're hungry. They're lying in this barn in the manger. And Ruth says to her elderly mother-in-law, excuse me, I think I have a plan. We had nothing to eat today. Remember when you told me about Leviticus? Remember when you said the Lord makes provision for even the poorest of the poor? Remember when you said the law of the God says that a person can go out in the harvest and the law says they can follow the harvesters and they can bend down and glean? And you might go, what is gleaning? To glean means this. The men would come and they would cut down the barley, and the woman would come down behind them, and they would have these strings, and they would rope the barley into bundles. And this was a big deal because not only did you fit the bundles, but depending on who you were following, guess what happens? You may be able to take a portion for yourself and your family, maybe even a little extra. That was not the norm. The norm is you were just given the minimum requirement. But there was always that one opportunity. So a little bit of barley would fall to the ground, and it wasn't worth paying the laborers to pick it up. So what would happen? Those were the scraps that could feed your family that night. Now I want to stop and say this. This is one of the most demeaning jobs within this culture that you can take on. It's a demeaning job. But she says, listen, I got this idea. If we can do that, maybe it gives God the opportunity to meet our needs. Gleaners were always in great danger. They were the poorest of the poor, and they were often thought or treated to not even be a human being. Often they were molested and found and victims of many, many crimes. That's the reason why Ruth is, the whole conversation is around, listen, I don't want you to follow the men, follow the women. Because you can't be safe in that kind of context. Ruth thought it's worth the risk. I can't just lay here and do nothing. So she turned to her mother-in-law and said, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to become a gleaner. And interestingly, Naomi, who before she had sons and a husband when this story started, doesn't say that's beneath you. She's given up and says, all right, go ahead. If that's what you want to do, if you want to take the lowest of the lowest jobs, go ahead and do it. Why is this story so important? What do we learn from Ruth chapter 2? Well, there's two important lessons. And there's no fill-ins in your blanks for this, but you can write it out in your margins. And there's two reasons why this material is really important for us. Here's this. Reason number one is this, and mark it down, and it'll be true. Every single one of us, you and I and every single person that goes through a season, some of us will go through a season multiple times in our life where you're completely and entirely dependent on the favor of someone else. Every one of us have been in the season where you have to be dependent on the favor of someone else. All of us will have a teacher who will hold our future in their hands. All of us will have a report concerning a health problem and how that's going to be served in the hand of a doctor or someone that has the expertise. All of us will find ourselves in the season that the favor of somebody else will come into play. But how does this play out when we're dealing with so many challenges in lives? How does this deal out when people are dealing with some of the crises of life? See, we walk in this life in seasons where we're profoundly dependent on the favor of others, or we can't make it. Each one of us have experienced that. And it's also true that every one of us will go through this exam or this test where you will be required by your Creator to give grace to someone you don't know. To extend favor where it's not earned and it's not convenient. At some point you're going to meet a Ruth, whether that's easily or quickly. God is going to do something that meets your need. I remember when Valerie and I had moved to San Jose, and we were church planners right out of seminary. Haven't even had any of our kids yet. And the car that I had just went poof. It gave up the ghost at 300 and some odd thousand miles. And I'm going, I don't know what we're going to do. All of a sudden, a couple who had been attending our church come up and say, hey, you know what? We want to talk to you. And after service, they came and, you always get nervous with this. When someone says, I got a car you can use. Come on, you've been there. Oh yeah, I know this one really, really well. They said, hey, we have a car that we want you to use because we know you're in a situation, just planted this church. And they took us to their car. And remember the old Buick Regals? Only this one was like a year old. And they said, here, we want you to drive this car. And oh, by the way, if you're ever challenged with fuel or anything, guess what? Just come to us because we want to pay the gas on the car. I will never forget that. Now I want you to fast forward for a moment. We were in desperate straits. We didn't know what we were going to do. We bought a car. And we're getting ready to sell this car because we went from 2 kids, now we're going to 3 kids, and it was a Hyundai. Remember those little Hyundais? They're like the compact Hondas, only they all are made of plastic and the handles come off and the window on this one would never go up and down. But it was a good car, and it was a beautiful car, but we said, man, we have to get a bigger car. And I could sell this car. And I can remember I went to the place that we were going to buy our car at the GM plant, or the GMC. It was Mancini Motors in the Bay Area. Well, my family, my mom, used to watch their kids growing up. So Mr. Mancini says, any of the Sotos come in, I will always give you a grand deal. They were going to give us $6,000 for that car on a trade-in, which I couldn't understand because the car wasn't worth $6,000. It was probably made with $600. You know, it was one of those. It was the first Hyundais that came out. You remember the Hyundais that came out? And so I'm going, man, we're going to get some money from this. We can get it towards a car. And then all of a sudden, the lady in our congregation needed a vehicle. And when Valerie comes to me and she gets that look in her eyes, it's kind of like Jesus just spoke to me, and you need to consider this, especially when it deals with money and I have to give something away. My first reaction is, you didn't hear from the Holy Spirit, that was Satan. Truly, God would not want us to sacrifice this and give it to someone else. But she comes to me and she says, honey, I've been praying, and we got this lady in the church who's struggling, and I'll never forget this, because it was like the Holy Spirit just hit me between the eyes. It was awesome. Yeah. Do you remember when somebody let us use their car and we were in desperate straits? God's saying that I feel like we need to give this car to this lady who's in need, and just give it. And of course I said, well, wait a second, let's pray really quick. You know, it's $6,000 we're on a trade-in that we don't even deserve and we shouldn't get. She says, we don't even need to pray about it. You know it's in your heart. This is Jesus. She was right. She was right. I will never forget the moment that we were able to give the keys to that car to this particular lady, and the tears coming down her eyes. She says, you got to be kidding me. I said, no, it's yours. We're going to sign the pink slip over to you. God, listen, I'm not making this up. God is just a great God. We gave that. I didn't go to Mr. Mancini. Now, some of the other Moabites here might have done that. There's people that'll do that, right? Hey, I did a real good thing. You were going to give me $6,000 in the car, but I made a sacrifice. Come through. Huh? We just gave the car. I show up to the GM dealer, and we're buying a van. One of those early GMC vans that you can fit like 6 kids. We needed a lot. We needed Velcro on the ceilings to hang the boys. We needed all that because we were outnumbered. Anyways, long story short, we walk in there, and the lady goes, Mr. Mancini's not here, but I'm giving you a slip. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a church planting pastor. I'm painting houses on the side. And I read the slip. Hey, Al, I've talked with the finance department. We're crediting you back $12,000 on the cost of the vehicle. Now listen, there's someone who's going to hear my voice, and I know there's a prosperity gospel message out there, and I've discussed this before, that goes, yeah, okay, where are you going to go with that? You give to get? No, I'm talking about seasons of favor. And you know what I found out with seasons of favor? It isn't some prosperity thing that you give to get and all that kind of ludicrous things, and God becomes one big casino in the sky. That's not it. What I do know is in every season there is a blessing. And how we live and respond in one season sets us up on whether or not God will give us favor in another season. And what I also know in terms of the principle of stewardship, this is what I do know. We can pray for more for something, or something that we think gives us and postures us in a bigger way. But the thing that God wants us to know is, hey, in that season of struggle, did you learn what it means to live beyond the borders of your own self? It's the truth. I know some people might go, Ben, I just want to become a millionaire and bless everybody. Well, no, you won't. Because when you have little, you don't bless anybody. You see, character is tested in the difficult times. But write this down. This is good stuff. This is gold nugget. I've learned this in life. You have too, many of you. Character is shaped in the difficult times. But you really know your character when you're successful. You really know where your heart is when you've got success. When you got money in the bank and life is so good and everyone thinks you're charming. You fooled them. Because God blinded you. You know, one of those seasons where you're just the greatest thing. And you go, why is this? Because God says, in those seasons, how are you going to steward? How are you going to be the recipient of what I'm going to give you in those seasons that will bless others? That's the whole context of chapter 2 in this whole thing of favor. And there are 4 lessons here. And I want to move really, really quickly through these 4 lessons that I think that we can get from these verses in terms of what we can take and how we can apply it. Because you see, it's important to catch these things. Here's the first lesson. God's favor is attracted to humility and courage. Wow. If you want to magnetize God's favor, here's where you need to know that it's humility combined with courage that attracts it. Wow. Here's a question I'll ask. How many of us in this room are parents? Yeah. How many have seen children and have seen teenagers? How many of you have seen your children and have seen teenagers? Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I have noticed that when my kids were smaller, I happen to have one of my sons who's here from Southern California with me. Love all my boys. When they're smaller and they're kind of in that state of innocence, they don't eat a whole lot. But when my boys got bigger, I would cry out to God and say, they're a walking famine. Famine has hit the Soto household. We would go to Costco, and the lady that we would go to her stand every time she apologized to me. She said, I'm sorry. We would come out with about $700 food. I'm not talking extra, just food. 8 gallons of milk a week. Yeah. I called the United Nations and said, you know that drop you have to Croatia? Bring it over here to the Soto household. But I had one son. We never, every time, we do Friday night dinners, right? And we'd take the boys out on a Friday night. And pizza always scared me. And I'll tell you why, because I had one son. My son Michael was my second oldest. Michael is thin and tall at the time, but that boy can eat an extra large pizza by himself. By himself. He could just eat. And I used to sit there and just was amazed, and I would sweat. And he goes, Dad, I'm still hungry. I said, no, you're not. It's all in your head. It's all in your head. There was no leftovers. In our house, Valerie, if you would watch how she made pasta, you remember those times, huh, son? She'd make a thing like this of pasta. By the time we were through, there was no leftovers. Very few leftovers. Don't even get me started with cereal. My boys never ate cereal in a regular cereal bowl. They got the salad bowls, the big ones, and they just pour it in there. And I go, listen, I didn't know it's time to graze. I'm really hungry. Yeah. Here's what I want you to catch. We've all had those moments of gleaning, and those moments where there's leftovers, and you just go, boy, I wish. But you see, here's the thing. Ruth was not going to settle for leftovers. She had the humility and the courage to trust God. Look at verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite, I want you to catch this. She's being reminded once again, repeated by her, that she's a foreigner. Said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor in. Now I want you to catch this. She's once again being expressed that she's a foreigner. And she's taking the lowest of the lowest job because she's saying, I want to do something that gives God the opportunity to do what God must do. I'm not going to sit here and Naomi, you're bitter. And we all know bitter people like that. And this is what happens when challenging situations come. All of us have had seasons at every level of relationship where we get hurt and we get bitter. And then we begin to excuse our bitterness with excuses. And we begin to talk around our bitterness. And we no longer want to deal with our bitterness. And that's where Naomi was. I'm going to make an excuse for it. I have every right to be stuck in my bitterness. But here's the thing. Ruth says, I can't stay stuck there. I've got to be able to do something. Yes, there's grief, but I'm not going to have a pity party. I'm not going to just stay here and pretend like things are going to change. I have to come up with an effective strategy, because here's the one thing that I know, Naomi, God is for me. God is for me. Listen, favor is not about, the kind of favor we're talking about is not the kind of favor, you can't earn it, but you can attract it. And there's a difference between the two. We're not talking about earning God's favor. We're talking about attracting it. Think about Ruth here. They leave Moab. And she says, I'm not going to give up. And they go across the first river. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go across the second river. I'm not going to give up. They go across the mountain range. They go through Jerusalem. And I'm not going to give up. They get to Bethlehem. I'm not going to give up. Meanwhile, Naomi is sitting here and she's checked out of life. And I want to put a comma right there. The problem with bitterness, and the reason why the writer of Hebrews can say where there's a root of bitterness, there's a multitude of evil, is this. If you don't deal with bitterness, bitterness will pollute every aspect of life to the point that it will numb out any kind of sense of God in the midst of anything. That's the problem with bitterness. Ruth says no. And look at verse 10. I love verse 10. At this she bowed down her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you would notice me a form of this? Notice she bows down to the ground. Basically, she's showing honor and humility. She's saying, listen, whatever I'm going through, I'm going to go through it and I'm going to live through this. And then she encounters a little bit of favor from the foreman. Even more favor from Boaz. And then in this verse we can see that even though she's a foreigner, there's favor on her. And look at verse 11. Boaz replied, I've been told all about you, what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. Wow. Humility and bravery are the building blocks of a great reputation. Wow. Her loyalty and her humility combined with courage. Write this down in the margin. Please write this down in the margin of your notes. Humility and courage are the building blocks of a great reputation. It's not proving who you are. It's not trying to somehow prove your credentials. It's basically living for God with humility. Verse 13. She gets some favor, and what does she continue to do? Look what it says in verse 13. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants at work. In other words, she's saying, I'm not even like these other servants you have. I'm lower than them. But she says, thank you. Can you just look up here for a moment? I want to ask you, have you ever been in a season where you just felt like God just treated you invisibly? Like, man, God, where are you? Somehow, God, you don't even see, you don't even listen to me. Somehow you're not even aware that that still small voice, it's a million miles away from me. Hey, Dad, can you play that song? But then all of a sudden, God's music shows up. God's music shows up. I got a little bit of a dancing, huh? I'm Puerto Rican, so I got moves. I want you to catch this. I want you to catch this. God wants to dance with us. And He always wants to dance with us. And Ruth is asking this question, and she's going, well, listen, I'm going to trust you, God, because I don't believe you're treating me invisibly. I'm going to reach my hand out, and I'm going to believe that you're going to meet me, and you're going to take my hand. Now listen, so as I say, well, I don't know how to dance. But boy, there is nothing like when you are dancing and you're in sync with another person, and all of a sudden, you just know that you're in that moment of rhythm. See, that's what God has called us to. To the discouraged person, to the overwhelmed person. He's saying, you're not doing your dance. Dance with me. Get on the dance floor. Don't let bitterness remove you. Don't let self-pity remove you from that. But dance with me. Allow me to dance with you. Which leads me to lesson number 2. God's favor is always at work, but hard to predict. If you look at verses 3 through 4, these might be some of the most powerful lessons in the book of Ruth. And so we catch in these verses in 3 and 4. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. There are several things when you take your hand out and when you begin to surrender. Listen, when you're in a tough season and things aren't breaking your way, that's the worst time that you begin to take control. That's the worst time that you say, let me take matters into my own hands. It's the time that you literally say, God, you take the lead. That's what Ruth is modeling there. God takes the lead. When you're in a season of grief and lack, stop leading yourself and let God take the lead. You know, when you're dancing, they always tell you this. You've got to be able to follow your partner. You have to be able to be in rhythm. Part of being in rhythm with God is saying, God, I'm going to let you take the lead. There are too many plans. Write this down. Bitterness, unforgiveness, offenses of the heart always will put us in a place where we will make decisions in reaction to something, and it will seem so reasonable to us, but it isn't a God idea. It may seem like a good idea, but it's not a God idea. Here's number 2. God sees the path. You don't have to see all the variables of your future. See, God sees the size of the stage. He basically sees all the parameters of what's going on. Thirdly, God chooses the steps. See, God's favor, ladies and gentlemen, is a narrative. It's not just an event. It's the ongoing story. It's a choreographed dance with God throughout life. And so here's my application question here. Where do you need faith that God is still at work? See, some of us have forgotten that we have asked God for what God to do in our lives. You know, some of us have given up on dreams. We've given up on hopes. We've said, that'll never happen. But I'm here to tell you, God is at work. Sometimes we get spiritually fatigued. And we think, man, you know what? God doesn't even see me. But listen, God is at work. He's at work. Look at lesson number 3. God's favor brings order to chaos. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Don't reprimand her. In other words, God's favor is on her. There is chaos. This may not be normative behavior for us right now. But Boaz tells orders to his men, don't reprimand her. And then you know the word there for reprimand means? It means don't embarrass her. Lift her up. Don't let her be all humble down there. Make her feel significant. That, you know, he's offering something to her that normally would never be given. And in verse 16, Even pull out some of the stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. In other words, don't give her the leftovers. Give her what's in the bundle. Don't have her pick it up off the floor. Give her what's in the bundle. Why? Because her reputation has been one of humility and courage. Now you got to understand, can you imagine what Ruth must have looked like? I don't want to take a whole lot of time, but she stinks. I'm not saying that, just she smells. She's not in her best frame of mind, because some of us would say, hey, before we have this conversation, let me go home, let me shower, let me do what little Bath and Body Works I have left, so I can come back and I can put my best foot forward, because I want to really look like somebody who deserves this. She smells. She's skinny. They've done a lot of traveling and hard work. There's sweat. And it's in this that God says, it's the timing of my grace. This is the right time. I'm going to bless you. Boaz possibly gives a lot of excuses for not giving favor. There's a lot of excuses for not giving favor. Think about it. Naomi's bitterness. First of all, he could have said, I know Naomi, and she's so bitter. Let her stew in her juices. There's Ruth's background. I don't need to give you favor because you're a foreigner. Matter of fact, some of our relatives in the past probably fought and killed each other. Kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys. There's Bethlehem's famine. Why should I bless you when I've got people that are literally starving in Jerusalem? And then there's his reputation. In a male-dominated culture, why would this man go out of his way and not have his character be judged that he's got some other insidious type of motive to want to be able to bless Ruth? What about his reputation? Listen. Favor doesn't come because of an earned reputation that we have. Favor comes simply because we reach our hand out and Jesus extends it to us. That there's a God in heaven. And there are 3 graces that Boaz provides that we can find in the person of Christ even. Here are the 3 graces in chapter 2. The grace of timing. Look what he says in the verse. Anyone in whose eyes I find favor. He comes to her when she needs him. Right at the right time of the harvest. Here's the second one. The grace of protection. Don't lay a hand on her. And then there's the grace of provision. And you need to know this. All of what she gathered, that ephah, that's 70 pounds of barley that Ruth has to put in a bundle, and she has to carry that. And this woman's got some strength. Why? Because God gives her the provision. What's the application? Where do you need faith that God is still at work? Where do you need faith that God is still at work? And it leads me to the last lesson. God's favor rekindles lost hope. Lesson 4, our final lesson, has to do with Ben McMahon. Ben McMahon is an Australian. He studied Mandarin when he was a student. He wasn't good at it. He wasn't fluent, because no one who speaks Mandarin as a second language is all that good at it naturally, because the languages just don't go together. Then Ben was in a car accident, went into a coma. When he woke up, a strange thing had happened. He could no longer speak a single word of English. He couldn't remember a single word of English. But guess what? He could remember Mandarin perfectly. He woke up and was speaking fluent Mandarin. They went and got a translator, and the translator said his accent is perfect. His grammar is perfect. Here's the lesson about our strange and wonderful complex brain that God has given us. You do remember everything. Everything that happens to you, good or bad, every Spanish lesson, from French lesson, every math lesson, it gets in there and it stays somewhere in there. Now sometimes something may block it, like a little fleck of bacon. I don't know how it works. But it's the difference between your processor and your RAM. You have a wonderful processor, you need to upgrade your RAM. I just lost a few of you. You go, I don't know anything about processors and RAM. But here's the point. You remember everything. You can't recall everything. In fact, you choose to forget some things. And this is the story of Naomi. Naomi knew God. Naomi knew God, and she knew God's law. And think about it. Her daughters-in-law. They came from a pagan culture, and all of a sudden Ruth has got the incredible knowledge of God. She knows the Old Testament law. She knows about gleaning. She has an incredible spirit about her. And then you go back to chapter 1 where Ruth says those incredible words, where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. But who developed the character of Ruth? And who developed this person? Let me tell you who it was. Naomi. Naomi was an incredible example of faithfulness in the law of God. And this is what changed Ruth. She was powerfully godly. But then she became forgetful and bitter. And she forgot the goodness of God. Some of us have forgotten the goodness of God. But there's hope for us. See, God, His favor rekindles lost hope. God's favor lights the fire of remembering. It unclogs the pathway of how good we know God is and our experience with God. It is all of this that when we get caught up in the passion and the hope of God, we begin to understand, our memory kicks in and goes, that's the goodness of God. There are so many of us, and I got to tell you something, some of you VIPs, I say this respectfully. I say this respectfully. We almost want to live our lives like God's done with us, and we're just, our years have passed, our lives are over. He's done. And I want you to know that's not true. I know it's not true because every Sunday night I get to watch Mike Spade play full court basketball. Jesus help him. But you want to know the truth? Mike doesn't know this. He inspires me. Now, am I going to go out there and play basketball? Are you kidding me? No. But I want to run my race well. When I see a guy out there who can mix it up with these young guys, and you talk to Mike, and Mike will just say, I just want to be around the guys. I just want to be around the guys. I just want to hang out with these guys. I just want to have influence in their lives. I love that. I love that. That life is not done yet. Look at verse 20. The Lord blessed him. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, He has not stopped showing His kindness to the living and the dead. She added that man is our close relative. He is the one of the guardian redeemers. Henry Newman said it well this way. The Christian leader of the future is called to be theologians, persons who know the heart of God and are trained through prayer, study, and careful analysis to manifest the divine event of God's saving work in the midst of many, catch this, seemingly random events of their time. What's Henry Newman saying? Regardless of all the stuff that life throws at you, you remember that God is for us. So here's the conclusion. Do you really need a real hope and favor from God this morning? Do you need to reach out your hand and do your dance? History has taught us this, and I'm finished with this. The phrase that Corrie ten Boom gives, never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. And I'm just going to stop right here. We're going to finish up in worship, and Will in a moment is going to continue worship with an offering. But if I could just make eye contact with you and say this. We have Ruth and we have Naomi. We have Naomi who lived a great life, and there's a lot of Naomis in this room. And by the way, let's make it gender neutral. So I don't want guys going, hey, I don't want to be a Naomi. I want to be a Sam. I get that. But let's use her as a model, as an analogy to say there are many people here who have lived historic lives of rhythms of faith and grace and courage through every challenging moment in life. And for some of us, it would be easy to give up and say we're done. It'd be easy to say let bitterness creep in and say I got no more to give, and I'm here to tell you that is a lie. God has more for you. And then there's many of us who might identify with a Ruth that says, man, I didn't expect any of this, but I'm going to believe God, and I'm going to just live my life accordingly. That it's time to exercise and give control up and say, God, I'm going to extend my hand to you and know that you're going to meet me here in this place. You're going to meet me here in this place. I finished with this final thought. You know you're going to get these little tidbits because being a coach, I get a lot of ideas. I sat on the sideline this week. I got freshmen on my team. In 30 years, I've not had the kind of season that I'm having this year. But I wouldn't change it for a moment. New program with kids that don't have the physical ability to match up. But they're learning and they're growing because they're playing sophomores. And you all know as parents, between freshman and sophomore year, your kids develop and mature in ways that are just huge. And during the game, I'm sitting here and our boys are playing a school where the boys are just huge. My center weighs 120 pounds. That's my center. He's playing a kid who's 250 pounds. And he's playing with all of his heart. And afterwards, he's got tears in his eyes. And he comes up to me and he says, Coach, I gave it everything I have. And I cried. My son was there, and it really touched me to have my son there. But then the next day, I'm kind of contemplating. I'm going, God, I'm just so proud of my boys because you know what? They're learning and they're growing. And then Betsy sends me a picture. And the picture is me coaching at Lincoln. And her son, he would always come up to me and say, I want to be your water boy. I want to be your water boy. He was the best water boy I ever had. He came to every practice when he was, before middle school, he was in elementary school still, wasn't he? 6th grade. At the end, the whole team honored him because he took his, and he used to always tell me, I'm going to play football. He used to tell me, I want to play for you. I hope you can coach me. I said, well, I don't know. We'll see. And she sent that picture, and I thought to myself, there's little Ian on the sidelines with me as a water boy, and today I have the privileged opportunity of coaching him, and he's turned out to be one of our finest linebackers on the team. The reason why some of you Naomis can't give in to bitterness and you can't drink it is because you still have life to give to someone else. And if you don't give it, someone's going to lose out. That's why we surrender it. That's why we surrender it. And there have been plenty of moments I said, God, I don't want to do this no more. I don't want to do any of this stuff. It's just too much. And God says, yeah, but I'll give you a grace. I'll give you a grace. Jesus, I'm so deeply grateful for grace. Thank you for this church. Thank you for your heart. I pray that if there be Naomis, people struggling with bitterness, people who are bound up, that today you would just release them and free them and allow them to know that there is life, that this whole story of Ruth is about you giving us favor, your favor, and posturing ourselves in such a way to say, I'm reaching out my hand because I can't do it on my own. I need you. For that we're grateful. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you, Bayside.